Welcome to Bigfoot Society. If you have Bigfoot activity to report from the same areas discussed in this episode, please reach out to me directly after this episode. And if you'd like to be on the podcast to discuss a personal Bigfoot encounter, please reach out to me directly at bigfootsociety@gmail.com. Do you wish there was more Bigfoot Society to listen to every week? Well, there is now. If you become a supporting member over at Patreon, you get a special members-only episode every single week on Wednesdays, and sometimes even more episodes. Head on over to patreon.com/the Bigfoot Society. And now let's get on with the show. All right, Bigfoot Society, we've got the privilege of talking to Rob today. Rob's an individual that reached out to me wanting to share a few interesting things that have happened over the years. Welcome to the show, Rob. How's it going?
Oh, pretty good, Jeremiah. How you doing?
You know, having a good day. Just kind of hanging out and getting over head cold, and just maybe some electrical interference on this, but it'll be fine. But I'm just excited to talk to you today. We were having a little chat before this started, and it sounds like you've really had some interesting things happen over the years. So, I'm just glad that you're able to chose to share those with us today. So, Rob, feel free to let's start this. It sounds like we have to go pretty far back to get going with your story. Your story starts, as you're pretty young. You started experiencing stuff right off the bat, it sounds like.
Oh, yeah. When I was, it was probably the late 60s, going into the early 70s. My dad would take us to Mount St. Helens on a yearly camping fishing trip, and we'd go to this one spot all the time. It was called Eagle Cliff, and I'm sure if anybody's familiar with Mount St. Helens, that area, they probably could tell you where that's at, because it's by Ape Canyon, Ape Caves. So we'd fish right there in the reservoir right there, and camp right there at the cliff. Back then, the campgrounds was right there at the base of the cliff. I think they've since moved it, but we experienced some stuff right there. There's a bridge that goes across the river right there, and everybody fished for steelhead. And when the bridge would get full, people would go over to the base of that cliff over there. And I just remember, because I was really young, I was with my dad, and I was always with my dad fishing, of course. And at that young age, I was probably about during that time, 6, 7, 8 years old, maybe up till I was possibly 9 or 10 at the oldest. But we went over to the base of the cliff one time because the bridge got full of fishermen, and we went over there. But I remember my dad mentioning something to a friend of his that we would go with once in a while, or he'd come with us once in a while. And they were talking about not being able to fish on the other side by the cliff. And me being an intuitive little kid, asking, well, why? Right. His friend says, well, the hairy man in the woods doesn't want us over there. And I said, who? And my dad kind of interrupted and said, hey, don't scare him. Yeah, it's just the park ranger doesn't want us to go over there and fish. So I bought into it. And I said, oh, okay, all right, whatever. But that time we went over there, and my dad's friend was already over there, and he was yelling at us, saying, hey, we kept going, and we started seeing rocks coming down into the water. And he yells over at us and says, stop right there. They're throwing rocks off the cliff right now. And there was boulders landing right in the middle of the water by the time we turned around and went back. But that was my earliest experience. And so, time went on. But I mean, that was evident that there were some Sasquatch up there throwing the rocks up. And big boulders. I mean, just launching them off the cliff right into the water. It wasn't a landslide or anything like that. They were thrown out there into the water. But so that incident right there, he says, his buddy turns around and yells up at the cliff going, "Hey, stop throwing them rocks." And he took off and he tore up that hill. He went up onto the cliff and came back and he said there was nobody there. There's nobody up there throwing rocks. So those things got out of there. But that whole area right up in there is pretty wild. We'd go up to Ape Canyon. It was right up around the bend right there, probably about 10 miles. And that's where that whole incident with the miners back in the 20s, where they were attacked by the Sasquatch up there on the mountain.
That was the first memory you have of experiencing weird stuff then as a kid? Okay.
Yeah, that was it went back that far. But I mean, there was a couple other times. So after that, life goes on. Mm-hmm. Another 10 years goes by. 10 years, when you're a little older, it doesn't seem like it's much, but when you're a kid, it's a long time, So it's like 10 years later, parents divorced. I went and lived with my dad up in Cascades, up in Washington. And that's where I was born. I was born in Seattle. And so he had and that's where we lived. We lived in Seattle. But we eventually moved away from there. I went down to Nevada and came back and lived with my dad in Issaquah. And that's where everything really happened. Things started turning up. The heat started turning up on the Sasquatch instances. And I think we used to, I'd invite some people out for the weekend from my buddies from Seattle and stuff. And I was like 16, 17, 18 years old, and we'd get somebody to buy us beer or something. And we'd go to the cabin and party a little bit, and then it was one incident was just a buddy of mine, just a friend of mine from Seattle came for the weekend. And my dad's a long haul truck driver, so he's never home. Eventually my sister moved there and lived there with us there at the cabin too. But this one time my buddy of mine and I were drinking a little bit and feeling a little like we wanted to go do something, and my dad's truck was sitting there, his Dodge Power Wagon was sitting there in the driveway. And he goes, "Well, let's take the truck out and go, four-wheeling or something, And I'm like, and there's just logging roads and stuff up there in the Cascades, so it's a pretty cool area. And you can go out and do that. So I grabbed my dad's keys, and he wasn't due to be back for a couple of days, so he'd never know. So we grabbed his truck and tore off up this other mountain down the road, about 10 miles. And we were on this old logging road. It was old switchback logging road. We're cruising along, and it was that night. It's probably about 10, 11 o'clock at night when we first went out. By the time we got out in that area, it was like midnight. And my buddy's driving. I'm in the passenger seat. And he turned this corner too sharp. And the wheels kind of caught the edge of the road. And I was like, "We're going to go over the edge, And he's like, "No, I got it. He punches the gas, and all it did was make the truck roll right over the edge. And it being a logging area, it was all clear cut. And so there was really nothing to stop us from rolling down the side of the mountain right there. And we got all the way down this little ravine, and the truck finally stopped. We had to get out, but the doors were like all smashed in. I couldn't even get out. Couldn't even crawl out a window or anything. But we finally got out. We smashed the back window out and crawled out and hiked back up to the road. And so by this time, it's maybe, I don't know, it's like midnight, 1 o'clock. Couldn't see anything. It's pretty dark, you know. Eventually your eyes kind of adjust to the darkness and you can start making stuff out, and you're rocking down the road. Jim says, "Hey, there's something walking next to me on this side of me here." I'm like, "No, there isn't." And he goes, "No, watch, look, stop." And we stop. There's nothing going. I couldn't hear anything over there, but we start walking, and he goes, "No, listen, there's something walking next to him, pacing us on his side of the road." And it's just every step. It's matching every step. We'd stop, it'd stop. We'd walk, it would walk. And we'd stop it. You could hear it because it was in the bushes, and it'd take a couple more steps when he stopped. You're right, there is something over there. And then eventually, I'd hear something over on my side of the road. And I was like, "Yeah, hey, there is something. There's something over here now." But what it was doing was it would walk on his side of the road, and then it'd cruise down the road a little bit, and it'd cross the road, and then wait for us to walk, and it'd be walking on my side. And then it would go over to his side after a while. So it was circling us. And every once in a while, we'd kind of see a flash going across the road, and you were like, "Yeah, you're right, there is something there." That was kind of creepy, you know. And we're trying to figure out what the heck it is. And another one shows up. And now they're pacing us, both of us, on both sides of the road. And it took a couple hours to come down that mountain because we had already gone up one side, and we're actually going down the other side. And we were wrecked, and we wrecked there. So we had to walk the rest of the way. And those things paced us all the way down the mountain. And it took probably a couple hours with those things next to us, just creeping us out. It was scary. You never knew if you were going to get ambushed or what. Neither one of us had a weapon. All we had were our Bic lighters, flicking our Bic every once in a while to see the road.
Oh, wow.
We got down and got out of there. That was the next time something happened, and that was freaky. That was just terrifying.
Was this around a certain area you remember that you went up in? Like, let's see, there's like Cougar Mountain, or just this was on a random Forest Service road somewhere?
Okay, so you're looking at the map, I can tell, because you see the mountains right there, right?
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. It was Tiger.
Okay. It's the Tiger Mountain area. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it was Tiger right there. I lived on Squawk.
Okay.
Can you see Squawk right there?
I can. That must have been absolutely. I'm just trying to picture what you guys are going through. So not only are you freaking out because you just trashed the truck, now you've got something pacing you out of this area, and all you have is Bic lighters and nothing else. Holy mackerel.
Yeah. You can imagine it. It doesn't sound much when you talk about it, but to be there in that moment, it's like, am I going to make it? Am I going to make it down this mountain?
And then I'm guessing, so when you get back and then your dad shows up, I mean, you got to tell him about the truck.
Yeah. He was pissed.
Oh my goodness. Did the Bigfoot thing come up at all?
No. No, he was pissed off. In fact, he went to the bar for a week and never came back until he had to leave on the road again. He was pretty pissed off.
Oh my goodness.
Not happy. Well, we did get a tow truck down in this little town and went back up there, and even the tow truck driver was like going, "Oh shit, is this even worth it?" Because he finally got the truck. It took a while for him to get it up out of that area where it was at. And it was totaled. It was totaled.
Oh my goodness. You mentioned that you saw like a flash. It would like cross. So was that like, was it
Yeah.
like a little light or what was that
No.
about?
Oh no. Yeah, I think it was just moving so fast.
Okay.
These things move. These things move like you can't believe. You've probably never seen anything move as fast as these things move.
Mm.
It was like a flash. It was like so you see. It's like if you ever like just take your hand and wave it in front of your face really fast. That's what you see. That's it.
Okay. Gotcha.
It was across the road that fast. Yeah, it was just a flash, like a shadow figure flash right in front of you.
How did that affect your buddy? Did you guys talk about it, or is it a thing where you just didn't even mention it afterwards?
Afterwards, well, yeah, we never talked about it.
Yeah.
That's the funny thing with this subject. People don't talk about it after they see something like that, unless you're around people, that have the same mind interests and stuff. I guess if you're looking for it. That was in 1980-ish.
Okay.
People didn't talk about that stuff back then. Not like we do now. That's why I've never talked about this. This happened like 40-something years ago.
It's incredible.
I never talked about it because if I did mention it, I get funny looks and ridiculed. And I didn't even tell my brother for 40 years what happened to me up there in that area. Because it was something that you just don't share. You didn't share that stuff with people. Now, because it seems like in the last, I don't know, 10, 15 years, this thing's kind of taken light again. Probably like it was when my dad was young. It's like when the miners and stuff up on Mount St. Helens, that happened. Well, my dad was born in the 30s, so that happened like in the 20s. But he always went up there fishing and camping and hunting and stuff. So he knew about all that.
Feels like there's like everyone knows about it up there, but for some reason there's just like it's very strange how just people, you would think if everyone started talking about it with each other, then we'd be able to figure out what's going on. But it is just, it's a very strange thing,
Even now up there, and there's plenty of sightings and encounters up there. I know there is. It's just in the culture. It's like people talk about seeing a bear, see a moose or deer, Well, there was a Sasquatch. Okay. Now if I ran into a Sasquatch right here where I live now, I'd be pretty I'd be pretty shocked. I live in the desert. We got other things down here like UFOs and aliens.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah, it's just it's a weird thing. How do you view the whole subject? Kind of dealing with this, and is this just like, is it a big ape for you, or something more?
No, you know what? When I was growing up and being around my dad and fishing and stuff, that's what we all were. Why would they name it Apes Caves or Apes Canyon? It was the ape, right? But when I ran into that big hairy guy standing outside my house, he was no ape. But there was something else that happened before that, because my dad did come back. He was pissed off about that truck, and I wasn't very anxious for him to come back. He'd been gone for like 3 weeks or so. And he came back, and I'm like, oh, kind of tiptoeing around him. And he says, hey, why don't you just, I think he's been gone for 3 weeks. And he's probably thinking about how I probably feel. And he probably got over it, which he did. It's just a truck. He still got me. But when he came back, he says, hey, why don't we go hiking? Take me up on the mountain where you take off and go hiking. Because when I first got there, it was just me, and it was a one-room cabin up in the mountain, and it had a kitchen and a little bathroom. That was it for the house. But there was a 2-car garage with a shop attached to it in the back side of it. And the shop was pretty cool because it was probably about 12 feet long by 10 feet wide, and it had a wood stove in it. So when my sister got there, after a while, I figured, hey, you know what? I'm going to clean out that shop back there and make my bedroom back there. That way she could have the house. Because it kind of sucks, having to share one room with your sister. You're both like, she's like 16 and I'm like 17 years old or so, And so just to give ourselves more, our own space, our own privacy,
Mm-hmm.
I cleaned out that room back there, and I had a wood stove in it and stuff. So it was okay, It was somewhere I could just go and have my own space and have heat. But so when my dad did come back, and that's what I do. My thing was I would just take off and go up on the mountain and hike around. And there was a mine up on that mountain that was a coal mine. And I would grab big chunks of coal and I'd bring them back down to the cabin. We'd throw a chunk of coal in the fireplace at night, and it would keep that house warm. And then I'd put chunks in my wood stove, and it'd keep us warm all night. You wouldn't have to keep feeding logs, stoking the fire in the winter. So that time he came back, he says, hey, why don't you show me where that place is that you go to? I said, all right. So figured, he wasn't too pissed off anymore about that truck, and wanted to spend time with me. And so we went out hiking, and he showed me he was like, hey, let's track some deer and stuff. And so we were getting on game trails and hiking all over off trail, seen a couple bear up by the mine where I took him. There was a sow with a cub up there. And we came back, we're on our way back, and we went up this game trail, and we're way up on the mountain, kind of going back towards where the cabin is, but way off trail, up on the mountain. And we jump across this it was like an old creek, like a dry creek bed. And he jumped across and motioned for me to jump over to one side, so not to disturb any tracks on the other side there. And it was all kind of a sandy area too, which was really good to see, tracks and stuff. And so I jumped off to the side, and he's pointing down and he's putting his finger to his lip, as to say, shh, be quiet, So he points at the ground, and he showed me the deer tracks, and I'm like, okay, And then he points at this other track. This other track was a footprint, a human footprint. And it was perfect. It was the perfect footprint. Beautiful. It was pushed down in the sand. It would have been perfect to cast this thing. It was the perfect footprint. It was only one in the whole area. We looked around for another track, but when he showed it to me, I was like, whoa, what do we got going on here? I'm like, I'm just a kid, what's going on here? And he's looking at it, and he just looks at me, and I'm like, is there a hermit or something that lives up here on this mountain? Because it looks just like a footprint, a human footprint. And he's like, nope, not that I know of. And I'm like, well, what is this thing? He says, it's a Sasquatch. I'm like, no way. He's like, yeah. I said, you mean like Apes Canyon, Apes Caves, and all that? He was looking at me going, yeah. And he could see the look in my eye, I think, because he could tell I was freaking out. Because it was pretty fresh. It was probably tracking the same deer that we were. And he says, well, we can either keep going and see what happens, or we can just go down to the cabin and not say anything about this at all. And I'm like, well, if it's those things down there at Eagle Cliff throwing them rocks and boulders in the water at us, trying to kill us, I don't want anything to do with this. I said, I'll race you back to the cabin. And I turned around and I boogied out of there, man. I was down that hill like lickety split. If you could run on top of bushes, I was. I was done, man. I'm down at the bottom of that hill, and he's all up there about halfway. Still, he's all, hey, don't leave me here. And I said, okay, I'll wait for you. And I said, shoot, he gets down, and he says, hey, he goes, don't ever run. Don't ever run. And that was another lesson. He was teaching me something. If it was a bear or something in if you trigger that prey drive, they'll come after you. And I was like, oh yeah, okay, all right, I get it. And so that was a lesson within a lesson. And so he says, well, get back to the cabin. Don't say anything about this to your sister. We don't want her freaking out. And I said, okay. And he says, and don't say anything to anybody. We don't want people to think you're crazy, because this isn't something you talk about. And so we got back down to the cabin, and my sister, she questioned me. She knew something happened, because she could see, she could tell I was so kind of freaked out. And he just said, yeah, we just ran into a bear. And so we just let that go. Thought maybe that was going to be the end of it. And I, to this day, I really wish it was the end of it. But that's the end of that part of that. That's all that happened then. My dad took off, and he was gone for a few days because he had to go back out on the road. And so sister and I are sitting there getting ready to watch a movie. We're sitting, not much to do. We were a kid, up on the mountain in a little one-bedroom cabin, or one-room cabin, We're getting ready to watch a movie. And it was a kind of a chilly night. And I said, hey, I went over and threw a couple more logs on the fire in the fireplace, and mentioned to her that, hey, you know what, before we start watching this movie, give me a little bit so I can go out and I'll start a fire in my bedroom, get a fire going in that stove out there, because I didn't like going out there when it was cold, get a little fire going and warm the place up. It won't be so cold when I go out to go to bed. And I always did that. So sister gets up, she goes in the kitchen, and there's like just a little doorway. Maybe I should talk about how the layout is of the little cabin.
Okay.
There's a couch sitting up against the wall. Behind the wall is a window. And if you're standing there at the window, you could look out up at the hillside there, where I would actually go through the fence to go up on the mountain to go hiking. There's a little path that cut through. There was a hedgerow of blackberries all the way down the backside of the cabin. And so it created a nice little buffer for, animals not to roam right into your yard, But like right about in the middle, there was a little pathway that was open. It was all grassy. And that's where I would spread the barbed wire fence apart and crawl through. I had a little board that I'd prop up, and then I'd crawl through because you couldn't step over it. It's four wire barbed wire fence. It hit you just above, you could almost push it down and kind of straddle it, but who wants to do that, right? So I just prop the board up and crawl through. And if you're with a buddy, one guy grabs part of the barbed wire fence, the other person puts their foot down, and you crawl through, and you just do that for each other to get through it. But I was always by myself, so I just had a branch or something, spread it apart. But so if you, right there, you'd look out that back window, and you'd see that spot where I could crawl through and go up the mountain. And to the right of that was the yard. On the left side was my bedroom. If you're facing it, my bedroom's probably back about 20 feet from there on the back side of the garage. So when I'd go out to my bedroom, there was a sliding glass door on the one side of the house, right in the fireplace. So when I'd go out to my bedroom, I'd go out that sliding glass door, go around the straight into my bedroom. And we had a light on the end table where the couch was that was on at night, and it shined a light up on that hill right there, and all behind there you could see pretty good. So we didn't have a porch light back there. We just used that light, and it was enough. So I grab a handful I stoked the fire there at the fireplace, grabbed a handful of kindling and rolled it up in some newspaper and a couple of logs, and had it like a football underneath my arm, slid open the back sliding glass door, and went around that corner, went cruising around that corner, just like I always did, 100 times. I don't know how many times I always did that, But this night, I went around that corner, wasn't really paying attention. It was just kind of in a hurry, and I ran right into something, and I bounced off of it. It's like hitting a brick wall. And I bounced off of it, and I fell on my butt. Firewood and kindling just goes everywhere. And here I am sitting on my butt looking up at this thing. And at the time, it wasn't even looking at me. It still was kind of crouched over, looking through the top of the window in the house. And I was like, what the heck is this? And it must have noticed me, because it just turned away from me and went down to all fours. And I was like, I just ran into a bear. Like, I better get up so this thing doesn't maul me while I'm laying on the ground. So I jump up on my feet, and it's like doing this movement away from me, and I'm just standing there, and I'm like, wait a minute, this isn't a bear, because the bears that we had there, they're just tiny black bears. This thing was like probably about 4.5 feet tall at its back. I'm like, oh, maybe this is a deer. So I wasn't afraid of it. I'm like, oh, it's just a deer. I'm like, or an elk or something. I'm like, oh, well, and I backed off a little bit, and I gave it its space, and I'm looking at it. I'm like, wait a minute, what is this thing? And I could see, like, it had longer hair than an elk. It wasn't fur, it was hair. And it was parted down its back, right down the middle of its back. And I could kind of make out the skin color of it. And it was kind of weird, because it was lighter skin on its back, and you could kind of see flakes. I mean, even thinking about it today, I'm going back to that moment, and I can still see the little dandruff flakes or something on its skin. And I'm like, still my brain's trying to rationalize this thing. What is this? I'm going through the list of animals of what it could be, and nothing's jiving with what it should be. And then it makes this noise, and it's probably about 3 feet away from me at this point. And it makes this noise, and it says, and it goes, ugh, and it stands up, and it turned around and looked right at me. And that's when I started freaking out, because when it looked at me, it had its eyes were so huge, and it was looking at me with this really surprised look on its face. So it was just as much a surprise that I was there than as I was surprised as it was there. But it was showing this very surprised look on its face, like a human would. And I'm like, wait a minute, what is this thing? And when this thing stood up, it just like kept standing up. And now I'm looking straight up at this thing. And it's probably, I'd say, every bit of 9 feet tall. And I'm like, wow. And the first thing that came out of my mouth was, what the F? You know? And I'm looking at this thing, and I'm like, whoa, am I really seeing what I'm seeing here? And I'm like shaking my head and rubbing my eyes, and I'm like, yeah, this is for real. This is really happening. And then it takes 2 or 3 steps. And when it stepped, you could feel the ground just tremble every step it took. And I'm like, oh man, all right, take it easy, big guy. And I'm like backing off now. Now I'm backing off. And it stepped right over that barbed wire fence like it wasn't even there. And there's a hedgerow of blackberries right there. So it couldn't just like turn and go right through them. Or I bet it could, but it didn't. And then it like kind of squatted down a little bit, and it made this noise, kind of like what you would hear from a big cat, like this, not a kind of like a purring sound. And I was like, whoa, it wasn't growling, but it was like, whoa, what is going on here? And I'm like, backing off, I'm backing off. And then it let out a scream. And all of this happened in one breath. It lets out this scream, just like a man. So when it screamed, it triggered me to scream. So I screamed too. And by the time I was done screaming, it had perfected my scream. It matched my scream perfectly. It mimicked my scream to the T. But it was like 100 times louder and bigger. And I was like, whoa. And it transitioned from that scream right into a high-pitched screech. And it was so high, and it was ear-piercing high. And I had to cover my ears. At first I cut my ears, and that wasn't enough, so I stuffed my fingers in my ears so that to keep my eardrums from breaking. And I could feel my ears popping and stuff, and I kept going, oh no, stop screaming, stop screeching, stop. And then it finally stops. I'm like, oh, thank God. And it went from that screech and transitions straight into a wolf howl. And I'm like, whoa, and now it's standing up, and I can see it up on that hill in that light, and it's got its arms back, chest out, and it's howling straight up like you could imagine. You could only imagine. You know, it's really hard to explain, because it was scary, and I did everything I could from just falling down, because it was all so intense. And it went from that howl straight into that big roar. And I was like, when it roared, I thought I was a dead man. That's when I thought I was going to die, because every organ in my body trembled, and it yelled, screeched, howled, roared right through my soul. And I was just standing there, and I couldn't move, scared to death. After it did that, I thought, that's it. Now I guess it's going to kill me now.
Mm.
And obviously it didn't. But after that, it pounded its chest, just like an ape. It pounded its chest and it cupped its fingers. Have you ever heard an ape in the wild pound its chest and it makes that popping sound?
Yeah.
That's what it sounded like.
Okay.
And then it said something. It said some. It was just some gibberish, and then it turned around and charged right through that spot where, because it was standing right there where I would go through the fence and go up the trail and go up on the mountain right there. And it turned around and it ran through that area, and as it got out of that area, all I could hear were trees falling and bushes crashing, and it was like a bulldozer, like an elephant going through all that up onto the mountain. And I was like, of course, I'm just scared to death, and I wish I could just say that I was brave and I was just standing my ground, but Jeremiah, I couldn't even run. I wanted to, but I couldn't. My legs were, I was frozen. And I turned to go back in the house. As I turned, I looked down the fence line and I seen something else down the fence line jump over the fence or step over the fence and start running up that way too. And I'm like, oh, there's another one. And then I turned and I went into the house, and my sister's standing there, and she's standing there going, what was that? And I told her, I said, that was a Sasquatch. And she's like, no way. I'm like, yeah, that's what happened. You heard it all. And she goes, oh, and she was standing right in the kitchen. She's standing in the doorway of the kitchen. And she turned to walk away, and she thought she seen one in the window right there at the sink. And she jumped and screamed. And I'm like, oh. So I said, just shut off all the lights, close the doors, lock them. And we just kind of curled up right there in the living room, waiting for everything to chill out. And I said, I think they're gone. I don't think they're coming back. And so that's it. That was probably the scariest part of running into any of this subject out there. And that was when I was like 17, 18 years old. I think it was just either before or after Mount St. Helens erupted.
That is extremely intense, and there's a lot of interesting stuff from that. Just the fact that you saw it actually mimic yourself extremely quick is super, super interesting. Did you see any tracks or anything? Like, how was the next day after that? Did you go outside, or did you not really? I mean, how were you the next day?
Next day I was like, well, that night we're like, my sister was saying, hey, you're not sleeping out there in that room.
Yeah.
I stayed in the house. But the next day, of course, I went out and checked it out. I went to see where the trees were that he'd knocked over and stuff, and if he had left any, I could see where the trees, of course, were knocked down, because I spent months up there on that mountain checking things out. And up that area where he just went through, there were trees that were there, and now they're on the ground. But yeah, I did. I went and checked it out. But I mean, yeah, there was, evidence of him cruising through there.
Man alive. It's just incredible how close you were to, which probably, I'm guessing, was like looking at your sister through the window, or like very distracted.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So when I first looked at I've had some time to figure it out.
Mm-hmm.
At first I thought, well, maybe it's, well, you know what? I was thinking, because I ran into this kid that lived up on the mountain when I was out hiking one day. Ran into this He was like 12, 13 years old. And here I am, like 16, 17. Of course, it's not somebody I'm going to hang out with. But I was following this creek up the mountain. And it was kind of neat because it had brook trout in it. And I was being a fisherman, I was like amazed by this because the creek was only about maybe 2 feet wide. I mean, you could step over it. It was a little deep, and it had brook trout running up it, and it was so thick full of fish you could actually reach down and pick one up once in a while. It's kind of fun. And so here I am checking out this creek, and it must have been a little spawning season or something because there was a lot there. And I ran into this kid. He's all, "Hey, what are you doing?" I said, "Oh, I just moved here, blah, blah, blah. And I've been kind of cruising around, checking out the mountain, kind of exploring a little bit." And he goes, "Oh, okay." He goes, "I'd be careful if I were you." I'm like, "Why?" He goes, "Well, there's Bigfoot on this mountain." I'm like, "What?" He goes, "Yeah, there's Bigfoot on this mountain." I'm like, "Well, tell me more." And he says, "Oh yeah, they come around the neighborhood and they slap houses and look in windows." And I'm like, "No, okay, whatever." And I was on with my way, and I kept just hiking around the mountain. And that was before the incident happened. So that's what it was doing. It was just doing its thing, running around the neighborhood, slapping houses and looking in windows. But then again, the TV was like right there. So I'm like thinking, why would this thing be surprised? How is it that I ran out of the house and ran into this thing and didn't? I mean, aren't these things supposed to be so elusive that they could sense you coming around the corner or something? Right?
It makes...
I honestly think it was looking at my sister.
Oh, absolutely. I would guess. That's what I would guess. I mean, just from talking to different people over the years, and it makes me wonder if this area is still known for like just Bigfoot messing with people. And I'm not overly familiar with this area, Issaquah, but
I would like to go back one day, and because I can Google Earth even that house right there, and it hasn't changed that much. Really hasn't changed that much in 40 years. There's some houses built up on the mountain right there, but even the back area of that house and where I would go up on the trail there and go up on the mountain, that hasn't changed at all. In fact, now that I look at it, there's a power line trail that goes straight behind that house, went all the way over the mountain down into the town.
Okay.
And it's all power line trail. It's straight up over the mountain down into the town. And that's how my sister and I would go to the grocery store.
Oh, wow.
We'd have to hike down the side of the mountain right there and go into the town.
So what happened when you had told your is your father correct?
Yeah, my dad.
Yeah. How did that go when you told him what happened, or maybe you didn't tell him what happened at all?
Oh no, I told him. He knew. I told him right away because I told him I wanted a gun. And back then we had this is so old. It was called a Ben Franklin drugstore. And on the one side of the store, they sold firearms. And my dad's watering hole where he'd go and drink beer at night was right next door. So I'd go down there with him, he'd go into the bar, and I'd just go into town or whatever. And I went into that Ben Franklin's, and I walked over to where the guns were, and I asked the guy behind the counter, I said, "Hey, so what's the biggest gun you got?" He goes, "Well, it depends on what you're shooting." I said, "Well, just for protection, what would you use for a bear or something?" Because I'm still not going to talk about it because my dad said not to talk about that. And he says, "Well, I got this 12 gauge right here." I said, "Anything bigger?" I'm thinking, I don't think a 12 gauge is going to work, He's like, well, he's looking at me kind of funny. He goes, "Well, the only thing I got any bigger than that here is this 10 gauge. I said, "Oh, okay." And I walked over to the bar, grabbed my dad, and said, I want to buy this 10 gauge that's next door. I didn't have any money. I had just got there, no job or anything. And he's like, oh, well, okay. He walks over and buys the gun for me. It was an old 10 gauge double barrel. And that's what I carried with me to go outside to go to my bedroom after that. I was like, oh, locked and loaded, ready for Sasquatch.
Wow. And he's just like, yeah, you absolutely need,
Yeah.
you need it. Yep. No.
Yep,
Wow.
Yep, here you go.
Okay.
But I'll tell you what, Jeremiah, I got a pretty good look at this thing. It was a face that is burned into my brain that I'll never, ever, ever forget. The look on its face is what I remember the most. It was so wild and crazy looking. Its eyes were like almost the size of baseballs, big white eyes popping out of its head with the black iris in the middle. And its mouth was wide open when it looked at me. And I was like, it was like it disconnected its jaw or something. The thing had such a big mouth. You could fit a watermelon in this dude's mouth. And then it eventually closed its mouth. You know, it had a mustache and a beard, but it wasn't real thick like you would think. It was. Now living it after I've lived in Alaska. I lived up in Alaska for a few years, like 13 years, and running into natives up there, they have a certain look to them. And Jeremiah, this thing, if I was to explain to you how it looks more like a Native American. This one did anyway to me, because they don't grow a real thick mustache and beard, but they can. It's just kind of thin, and that's how its thing was, and its nose. Its head was about as big as the rim on my truck. It was so big. And it didn't have a conical head either. It was round. Because I've seen other depictions of Sasquatch, and it doesn't look, I mean, it's close, but not the one that I've seen anyway. And its skin color was like a gray, like a grayish black. His face was a little blotchy. It had some freckles and stuff on it, like moles and stuff. I got a pretty good look at this thing. And then when it closed its mouth, it did this shape of the perfect O. That was before when it turned and looked at me, when it first stood up and looked right at me. It did all of that, and I could see all the facial features on him and what he was doing, and the surprised look on his face. And I'm sure I was just as surprised. I probably had the same look on my face. But I didn't do the perfect O like it did. It just looked kind of like the mask of a Native American mask of Sasquatch, where it has the mouth.
Right.
Mm-hmm. And the crazy eyes. That's what I seen, man. That was it.
Wow, that was it. That is so that's just wild.
And it was like a chestnut color. It wasn't brown, it wasn't black. It was in between brown and red. Its hands went down past its knees. And the thing about it is the way it walked, it was kind of clumsy. It looked it's like its upper leg and its lower leg weren't proportional like ours are. It's almost like his lower leg was shorter than where our knee bends. And so like when it was on all fours, it was level. on the ground. Its arms being longer brought his front up, or its, the front part of his body, brought it up, and then the leg where it bent. So it was proportional even when it was on all fours. Every step it took, it was like it trembled the ground. You could feel the ground shake every step. I don't know if it was doing that on purpose or what, but it definitely displayed some character of, alpha male by doing all this yelling and screaming and chest pounding.
Around that home, would you ever have like gifting things happening or like weird things left around your place or anything like that?
If anything like that happened, I didn't notice it.
Mm-hmm.
But I did have a dog, and it came up missing. So I'm pretty sure they probably ate that dog because it was always on a chain outside. It was gone.
Oh, dear.
So they didn't leave anything. They took more than they left.
Oh, you're saying like when they took the dog, or
yeah,
right, yeah.
And well, not just that, but all the blackberries would be gone. All the apples on the apple trees would be gone. Never ever have any fruit. They eat it all. I just wonder now, thinking back, that I ran around that corner and ran into him, and he's standing there looking in my window. I know what was going through my head, but now I think about trying to be in his shoes and wonder what was going through his head. He's probably thinking, this crazy human come around the corner and
right.
said, "Hey, stop looking at my sister." What was it thinking, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's just so wild.
Get out of here. Imagine what it was probably thinking. It probably knew it got busted and I was giving it the what for or something. I don't know.
Stay there for a while or not too much longer?
I was there for a couple of years.
Yeah.
So, when stuff like this happens to people, for some reason, I've heard a lot of stuff. I'm not a researcher or anything, but I listen to podcasts, and I've been listening to your podcast for a while. And I gotta hand it to my wife, really, because if it wasn't for her, I would never have told any of my encounters to anyone. She's the one that encourages me and pushes me to do that. I'm not the type of person that would just come out and start up a conversation about it. It's been something I've had locked up in the vault in me for 40 years.
Yeah.
And I'm not talking about it. I'm like, really? You want me to talk about this? She's like, yeah, you need to share. I said, well, okay. And so I tried. I've been trying for a couple of years, but, like we talked in a little while before this, for some reason, people don't want to release it or something. I don't know, or just haven't got to it. That's all right. But I'm trying. I'm doing my part.
And that's all you can do, for sure. What was it like when you first shared that with your wife?
It was actually something that happened when we were in church. We were all sitting around one day after church, sitting in the sanctuary, and somebody asked me about my encounter. And there was a few people sitting there that had never even heard of anything like this or had interest in it, but never heard anybody give an encounter, like say an encounter or their story. And so I was like, well, I don't know. And I'm really choosy about the crowd that I share the story with. I'm looking around like, I don't know, man. I don't think this is really the right place or anything to tell this. But they drug it out of me, and she was sitting there, and she told me she was just surprised. She was amazed. She always had interest in it and never really thought that it was ever something. But she said when she heard me tell my encounter there in church, she knew that I was telling the truth and that really happened. A lot of people, you say stuff like this to, they're just not ready for it. You can tell that they don't want to, they think you're full of whatever, and I don't really care. Now that I'm like 62 years old now, and I don't give a shit what anybody thinks. This stuff happened to me. I don't care if you believe it or not. I really don't. So now I'm at that age where I can kind of talk about it in the right crowds.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Was your sister pretty affected by all this?
You know what? I talked to her a couple of years ago at Thanksgiving, and we were talking about this subject, and I said something to her, and she goes, well, I got screamed right there too, because she was telling, so that's what it was. She's telling somebody she got screamed at, and I'm like, hey, no, you didn't. I was the one that got screamed at. What are you talking about? And she's like, no, I got screamed at too. And I said, well, you never told me about that. And I thought she was telling my story. And I'm like, wait a minute, that's right. That happened to me. And she's like, no, it happened to me too. And I'm like, oh, well, you never told me. And so it was like all these years, you didn't even say anything. And I didn't know that she got screamed at too. It's like, that's crazy that she had a similar incident right there that I did in the same spot.
Mm. That is interesting. Not, I guess, not overly surprising. When you think.
Oh, not at all.
Yeah.
It just gave validation to, like, after I said my story to other people that were in the room, they were like, what? It validated. It was like, if anybody thought I was foolish, and that pretty much shot that away, because she said something, She was like, no, that happened to me too. I was there. I mean, if you think about it, she was right on the other side of the wall.
Right. Yeah.
She was there too. It happened to her too. It didn't just happen to me.
After this, did stuff continue to happen in the rest of your life, or was this kind of the main, I guess you could say, like almost weird thing, and it's always it's been there and you're always thinking about it?
But I wish.
Yeah.
I wish it was the only thing that happened. And I think, like, once this happens to you, something like that happens to you, and it's like, it took me a while to go back in the woods. It took a while to go back on that mountain. It was like baby steps. And that's probably why I moved away, because I couldn't enjoy myself the way I did before. Well, I had a lot of other things happen because I couldn't just stay away from the woods and the mountains. I love it too much. It didn't rob me of that. I did, finally get over most of it, but it's always in my head when I go out there, or even when I drive by a wooded area, it's always like, you're gonna look, you're gonna look. So it's not like I look for it. I'm aware of it. So when I see signs of it, like tree breaks and stuff, tracks or whatever, and I still little things now, just little things. I mean, nothing is ever going to compare to that. So it's all little things now. A couple of years ago, when I turned 60, I went on a solo fishing adventure camping trip up the coast of Northern California into Oregon, fishing for steelhead and salmon. I had a blast. It was just a great time. And on the way, the way I went was through Willow Creek and all that. And before I left, my wife was like, "Where are you going that way? You need to stay away from that. You need to stay away from there." And I said, "No, I want to. Something inside of me just I need to go this way." And so, of course, I went through Willow Creek and from Willow Creek down the mountain there to Eureka, California, and then fished and camped and hiked the trail systems and all that on the coast, all the way up to Gold Beach, Rogue River. And I stopped in the Redwoods in Northern California, and what a beautiful area. I stayed there for a week, and then I spent the rest of my week going up into Oregon from there. When I was in Oregon, I went fishing for the morning. It was the afternoon, so I wasn't fishing at that time. But in the campgrounds, there was a trail that went down to the coast, and I really loved that beach. And I was in Brookings, Oregon. Oh, what a beautiful place. And I called my wife from there and I said, why don't we live here? I want to live here. And I didn't want to go home. It was such a beautiful spot. And so I took a drive and I went up to the Rogue River from there. I just kept the campgrounds for like a base camp. And I'd go out adventuring all day and come back to my campsite at night. And so I was on this trail, and I can't remember which, because I did a bunch of trails, and it was during the off season. So it was in late November, early November. Like I wanted to go early. That's right. It's like mid-November, and I was went down to this trail, popular trail, but it was off season, like I said, so there wasn't a whole lot of people there. There was more locals than there were tourists at that time. So I got down to the beach, and it was a pretty good hike down to the beach. And there was probably maybe 6 people down there, a few couples. And one person had a dog. And I was down there just kind of hanging out. And everybody, one by one, kind of took off and went back up to the parking lot and left. And then it was just me, and there was another couple down there with their dog. And then they turned around and they went up the trail, and they were hiking up the trail. And when they got to the top, I started hiking back up because it was a big bluff right there. And there's a switchback trail that you have to hike down. And so you get up to the top of the bluff, there's a bench right there. So you could actually, if you didn't want to hike down there, you could sit on the bench and look out over the ocean, which was beautiful. And so by the time I got up to that bench, I'm 60 years old, man. I'm ready for a break. So I sit down on the bench and I'm like, good, I'll just sit here and let these people go get in their car and leave. And I'll be here by myself. Well, somebody else showed up. But that's how it worked out. And I sat there for a pretty good while, taking it all in and looking at the ocean and just relaxing. And all of a sudden I hear this wrestling in the bushes, and I turn and I'm looking down, and it's like towards the area I need to walk. And here we are again, these hedgerows of blackberries. If you've ever been on the Oregon, Washington coast, you're going to run into that stuff. And so on each side of the trail, there's blackberries, like a wall on each side of this trail. You're not going off the trail. You're going straight down that trail back to the parking lot. And in the bushes, I hear this wrestling around, like wrestling and animal noises, like, rah, 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 rah. And they're wrestling in the bushes. And then I hear this, and I'm like, what the heck is this? And I'm like, no way. And I'm sitting there on this bench, and I hear this some mumbling talk, and I'm like, I can kind of make it out. It's a language, but I can't understand what they're saying. I can't understand what they're saying. I'm like, I'm just sitting there intensely looking or listening and looking over where the bushes stopped. I'm like, what's going on here? I'm thinking, and now my heart's just pounding out of my chest. I'm like sitting there, and this isn't happening really. Again, here we go. And so I hear this mumbly voice, gravelly, mumbly voice, and I'm like trying to follow what it's saying. And it's almost like a parent scolding its child, telling it to stop. And eventually, this is something that you started talking about on a podcast with somebody else that kind of triggered this one for me to send to you. Do you remember me sending you that?
Yes, I believe I do. Yeah.
So I'm like going, what is this voice? What is this language? And I'm trying to figure it out. And Jeremiah, I don't know how it is that I could actually start understanding what this voice was saying. I don't, it was almost like a telepathy, like if somebody's speaking in tongues to you and you're the interpreter and you can understand what they're saying, but nobody else can.
Mm.
That's what it was. That's what was going down. And I'm like hearing this voice, and it sounded like, hey, you two stop messing around. Your mom and I are trying to get some rest. We like it here. And if we get caught, we're going to have to move. This is what I'm hearing, Jeremiah. This is what he's saying. And we don't want to move. Now, take a little nap, get some rest, be quiet, and later on we'll go down to the beach and get some clams. And I'm just sitting there. I'm like, gulp. Okay. I'm being quiet. I'll be quiet. And you know what's funny is I didn't pull my phone out. I didn't push record. I didn't do anything like that. That was the furthest thing from my mind. Even though before I left, I thought, hey, I'm going to set up my recorder on my phone so that when I open it up, it's right there and I can just push record. None of that even happened. I didn't have time. But I got up after a few minutes. I'm like just sitting there waiting to calm down. And, my blood pressure is probably through the roof. So I get up and I'm like, okay. And I said it right out loud. I said, okay, I'm going to be on my way. Your secret's safe with me. And I just walked down the trail and I got in my truck and I left. And I left it at that. Now, and I'm thinking, well, when you know, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I'm thinking also, okay, well, maybe it was some homeless people. Okay. It could be. I didn't see anybody. All I heard were voices. That was it. But somehow I interpreted what the thing was saying. It sounded like Scooby-Doo talk, but I understood what it was saying.
I've also experienced something similar in Iowa where it's like, but the difference is I wasn't able to interpret it, but it was like, you can hear something and it's like mumbling, but you just can't, it's like right on the edge of your understanding. And it is the weirdest thing that you've ever experienced. Yeah. But it's so interesting that, you were able to interpret it somehow. And it's very, very cool.
I didn't even want to share that, but I needed to because it was something that's been with me for a couple of years now.
Yeah.
And it's like, who do you talk to about something like that? You can't just bring it up, hey, in a conversation with somebody.
Right.
I'm not going to bring that up, but it's just something crazy. You don't have to air it. You don't feel like it's a good. good for everybody to hear. But
No, I think it's important because I think there's some people where they are more attuned to things and they, you know, they're just experiencing things like this through their life, and their maybe eyes, ears are open to things in ways that other people are just not even tuned into, you know. So I don't think it's crazy, you know.
I mean, I spend a lot of time when I go out and like on my little adventures every year.
Mm-hmm.
I do this all by myself. I don't take anybody with me. I used to take my wife, and she's disabled. Now she can't really get out and do the stuff that we used to, but
Right.
she doesn't want she wants me to still go out and do what I love to do. And so I go and I'll take off for a week or two and come back. Was it last year or the year before? I took her on this trip and we rented a cabin. And that's the only reason why she could go, because I usually take either my van or I have a teepee tent. It's a hot tent. I have a little stove in it and stuff. It's pretty cool. That's when I took up the coast. And when I go just like up in Northern California, I took my van. I have a conversion van I can take. It was my dad's and I inherited it and fixed it up for myself. But this trip that we went up on, I rented a cabin so that she could be comfortable. And on the way back from this area, I took her to a waterfall that she didn't have to hike to, and we could just drive up to. That's one of my favorite things to do is hike to these waterfalls, and because they're really neat. So we went to this waterfall, and on our way back, it was getting kind of late. It was about dusk, but me being a fisherman, angler, I'm like always looking out at we're driving along this creek, and that's where we had the cabin. And I fished that creek and had a lot of luck. So I went back the next year. But we were driving past this campground. We were going over the bridge. I was looking off to the right or the left, and I was looking at a fishing hole. I'm like, oh man, that looks like a good fishing hole right there. And right as I'm looking at it, she goes, hey, look at this. What? And I'm like, I turn my head and I look at the road, and she goes, you're not going to believe what I just seen. I'm like, what? What did you see? And I said, there's deer and elk and stuff in this area. She goes, well, that wasn't a deer or an elk. I just seen a Sasquatch cross the road. I'm like, no way, you did? And I'm like, I'm not going to say she didn't. I didn't see it. She did. But she said she did. And I believe her, because we're right in that area. We're in the Lassen National Park. And so I was like, wow, that's so cool. And she was really excited. And I thought, wow, that's really neat that she had an experience like that. And so the next year, we went back to the cabin, and I was just talking to her about it like last night. I said, hey, do you remember this? And she goes, oh, yeah, I do remember that. I'm like, how could you not forget that? And she goes, I can't believe I forgot about that until you just now when you mentioned that. I said, well, because the next year I went by myself. And I always go in the off season because I don't like being around people. If I'm in a fishing spot and one person shows up, I reel in, I'm done. I pack up my stuff and I leave. And even if there's one person there. So when I went this time, and I go in like November, and no, wait a minute. No, I can't say it was November. It was the weekend of Memorial Weekend or Labor Day weekend, one of the two. I always get those mixed up. But it was hot because I didn't have a fire. But when I got to the campground right there, I went straight to that campground. And my wife thinks I'm crazy because I'm just going to go. I'm going there. I'm going to go there first, of course. And so I go to that campground, and there's only one other person in the campground. And I passed him up, waved to him. went and got my sight, and I picked the one way in the back in the corner by the woods, and went down to the creek and fished, caught a couple nice fish, but I hardly ever keep them unless I'm going to eat them. And I went back to the camp, and that night I didn't have a fire because it was warm out anyway. And I thought, I'm just going to sit here, and there's nobody else here except for that person way up the road. But I'm going to sit here. I set my chair right up against this tree, and I'm just going to sit here. I'm going to smoke a cigar and drink a couple beer and just be really quiet and see what happens. And I let the sun go down, and I just sat there and waited and everything. There's, then so the daytime animals are going to bed while the nighttime creatures are waking up and stuff. And I just wanted to see what happened, and nothing happened. And I'm like, all right, well, I went to bed, and it was hot. So I left the van door open and the back of the van open and stuff. And I kind of got a little creeped out, and I thought, well, I better close that because something's just come along and pulled me by the ankles and ripped my ass right out of that van. So I closed the doors, and I left the one little wing window open right next to my face where I was sleeping at night so I could have fresh air. And it was probably about 2:00 in the morning. Something come through that camp, and it was making the weirdest noise. And hey, like I said, I've been up and around. I've been in Alaska. I've been in Oregon, Washington, California, and I've heard animals. I've heard, what cougars sound like, bobcat, fox, all that. And they each have their own sounds. Even bear will make a little, grunting noise or whatever, or popping their jaws and stuff like that. But this thing come through the camp, and it woke me up, and I was like, what is that? And it was like doing this really weird yell coming through the camp. It walked right through the campgrounds, and it went right past my van and went into the trees back there. And I was like, I wonder what that was. That was weird. And then I just sat there for a few minutes and listened for anything else to happen, and closed that little window and went right back to sleep. That was another little thing that happened. And it's just one of those things, you don't know what it was, but it was something. And so just little things happen now that make you wonder, make you think. There was a time when I was up in Alaska, and I had 2 incidences up there. One was, I had a buddy of mine that we'd always go fishing together. And so on the weekends, he had a raft, and it was a 4-person raft. Well, actually 5, because he'd sit in the middle, and there was chairs on each end of the raft. And we had another guy with us this time. It would always usually just be him and I, and we used the other chairs to put all our gear on. And we would stop and fish these little sandbars and stuff, and nobody's around because we'd put in way up the river and drift the rivers down. Everybody would be combat fishing down at the other end, down by the parking lot and stuff. Nobody's ever up in the other areas, except unless you have a drift boat or something. And we drift down and stop, and it's kind of cool because you can sight fish. You can see all the fish pooling up in areas, salmon and stuff, and catch fish right on the sandbars and stuff. And my buddy and I would mess around with each other, just do guy stuff. And we'd stand like 30, 40 feet apart from each other. And then when the other guy isn't looking, you pick up a rock and throw it in the bushes behind them, right? Just to mess with their head, get them to turn around and just, hey, you're in bear country, you're like in grizzly country. So you're just messing with each other.
That sounds great.
So we just mess with each other, and we'd always do it. And then one day we're cruising along, or we're just standing there fishing, and had this other guy with us, and he was kind of a knucklehead. I don't know what that guy's deal was. He wasn't even fishing really, and he was just running around like exploring and stuff. Kind of a weird guy. And but Mark and I were standing there, me and my buddy were standing there, doing the same old thing we normally do. But this time we're standing about 30 feet from each other. We turn around, look at each other, we're like fishing and kind of, having a good time. And all of a sudden, a rock, and this other guy, he's standing over by the boat. All of a sudden, this rock, about softball-sized rock, landed right in between us. Just plop, right on the sandbar, right in between us. And we looked at each other and didn't even say a word. Just started reeling our lines in. Okay, it's time for us to go.
Was that the same size of rock you guys were throwing at each other?
Yeah, it was similar. No,
Wow.
It was a little bigger.
Yeah.
It was a little bigger, but I mean, we just pick up a little stone and toss it in the bush just to make a noise behind somebody. Yeah. But no, this rock come lobbing over the bushes and landed right in between us. There's nobody in the other side of them bushes, and I'll tell you what, bears don't have thumbs. They can't throw rocks. They might kick up a rock when they're like running or something, but they're not going to pick up a rock and throw it at you. So we're like, okay, we're out of here. And we just start reeling our stuff up, right? Throwing our rods in the raft and stuff. And this guy, this knucklehead, goes running off into the bushes, and he goes, I got to go see what threw that rock. He goes running down this in between in the bushes and stuff. And I'm like, dude, you need to get out of there. And he goes, there's something back here. Something threw that rock. I got to go see. Oh, man. So Mark and I we're just standing there going, oh, dude. We walk over there to the trail where he had ran into, and there's a track right there. My buddy Mark, he's got size 13 wader boots on. He puts both his feet in this thing. He's still got room on each end and side to side. And it's one single track. And I'm like, oh man, this thing's huge. He goes, do you think it's what I'm thinking it is? I'm like, I know it is. So I start looking about 8 foot away. There's another track. I'm like, well, this is his stride right here, and there's another track right there. And I'm like, dude, we got to get out of here. This guy's about ready to die back there. And he comes popping out of the bushes, and he goes, something's really stinky back there. Something stinks. I'm like, it's probably a moose kill, man, and there's probably a bear around real close. You're about ready to be killed too. We both grabbed him and threw him in the raft, and we tore ass out of there. Like, this little spot's over with. We're going to go down the river a little ways and stop. And that's what we did. We just went to another spot. There's always areas you get into where you just feel the hair on your back of your neck stand up.
Yeah, I'm trying to think if I've ever experienced that. I've experienced this super quiet of an area before. I have yet to experience the whole hair on the back of the neck thing.
Oh yeah,
I think that'll happen eventually if I keep going on out though to some certain areas.
You went up to Oregon, right?
Yeah, I went up and just this last July, so I'll be going up there in a few months again, which will be hopefully another great time. Do you find yourself trying to have a similar experience like you did when you were younger, or to have some sort of connection again?
Not really.
Yeah.
Not like that face-to-face encounter.
Yeah.
I wouldn't wish that on anyone. People go out thinking, oh, I'd love to see one. Well, you know what? You don't really want to see one. I mean, don't. Be careful what you wish for, man.
No, exactly.
Because these things aren't your friends. They're really not. They're a wild creature. They'll eat you. I think a lot of the 411 missing thing has some of those things, or some of those missing are from these things, man. I'm sure of it. I don't know why that thing that outside my house didn't just snatch me up and take me with him. I mean, it had every opportunity. I wouldn't wish that on anybody to see one. I mean, hey, you know what? I'd like to see one. Sure. Another one that safely in my truck and it crossing the road in front of me, just like my wife did. Mm-hmm. That's fine. or a little B9 thing. Like I heard some voices. Maybe it was a Sasquatch. Maybe it wasn't. Maybe it was a family. And if it was, that's fine. And because it didn't, nothing scary happened. But if it wasn't, then all right, cool, no problem. But when you know.
Exactly. It's a thing where people, I don't think everyone realizes that when you start to get into it, it does start to affect your life. And you start to, you can experience other stuff too, which is, it's almost like stuff needs to come with a warning label. You know?
Yeah, really.
Something like that. I don't know. Maybe not, but not everyone gets that. They're like, oh yeah, Bigfoot's a fun deal. And then I don't know. It just, you start to, when you talk to people a lot, you start to see different things that are, you know, they tend to pop up, and you're like, why do these keep popping up for everyone? You know, it's,
yeah.
I think there's maybe more to it, but who knows what we'll figure out eventually with all this, you know.
So I still see stuff. I don't look for it, but I'm aware of it more because I just see tree breaks and some tracks and stuff like that. I'm not out there casting tracks and taking pictures of everything I see. You know, I'm just, okay, all right, there, well, whatever. Just leave me alone. I'm just here to fish, or I'm here to hike. And I'll say it out loud. Just leave me alone. I'm good. You don't have to show yourself to me. I already know what's going on. I'm just here to hike or fish, or you know, just have some peace and quiet. I'll be gone. I'm not going to stay.
Yeah.
And I say that stuff out loud. I sound crazy, but hey, they're there, man. And we are the easiest thing to hide from. People are the easiest thing to hide from in the woods.
Well, we're very distracted by other things.
And most people stay on the trail.
Mm-hmm.
There's no borders for these things. They'll go wherever. You know, they don't have to stay on the trail. I mean, and people really don't either, but most people do, because you're usually hiking to a point and then coming back. All these hikes that I go on, I'm going to this waterfall and I'm coming back. Last year I did the McLeod Falls. I did those 3 waterfalls. I did that hike right there. And even on that camping trip, I went up to Mount Shasta. And that's a whole other subject right there. But on the way back from Mount Shasta is beautiful. It was great. It was a great experience. I seen tree breaks up there and some bushes, that some of those manzanita tree bushes and stuff. Those things are pretty strong.
Mm-hmm.
They use them for bird houses and stuff, and bird perches, because they don't break up that easily. But I seen a whole lot of them, like a bouquet, ripped up out of the ground, wadded up and thrown right on the middle of a trail. I'm like, what does something like that? I didn't see it do that, but there was evidence of something did that. And I was like, okay, they're here too. I'm sure they are. This is Mount Shasta. But I didn't stay on Mount Shasta. I actually camped at another place called Castle Craig. And I don't know if that place is any better for Sasquatch or not, but I'm pretty sure it's worse. I didn't see anything over there or anything. I fished the upper Sacramento River right there. But I did see tracks when I was at McLeod on the way back. I see evidence there too. I mean, you see evidence as long as you're aware of what it is. Most people, they're not even looking for anything like that, or they don't even know what it is if they've seen it. They're just taking a nature hike. I do too, but I'm also aware.
exactly. Once you start to know what to look for, it's very, very eye opening for sure. Rob,
But I did. Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say thank you for chatting today. It is probably one, man. It's a very, very intense encounter, and I just want to say thank you for sharing it. I know that it's probably a hard one to do, but I'm glad that you're at the point where you can actually, share with people for sure.
Well, I'm actually like I was saying to my wife, I think I'm done sharing. I don't think I'm going to do it again, but I figured I wanted to reach out to you because I have been listening to your podcast and hear some of your encounters and stuff. And every time I listen to an encounter, I relive my own through theirs. And in a way, it's therapeutic for me in a strange way. It makes me feel good that, oh, good, other people are coming forward. Other people are having these crazy things going on too. It's not just me.
Yeah, I hope that maybe this is just me not being super. Well, I mean, I'm a few years into this, but I would hope that, every year we get further into this. Maybe this is the year where, there'll be something that comes out really, really big, or, maybe not. But I think it's important that people are still sharing what they've experienced, and, we will see where this all leads eventually.
Yeah, well, you're kind of heading in the right direction. You went to Oregon,
Yeah, that's true.
I almost went to that this last year. I almost went up there to that Oak Ridge area to check it out. But who knows? Maybe I'll go next year.
It's a beautiful. I would recommend it. It's such a beautiful area and not overly hard to get to. You just drive over from Eugene area, and it's not.
I know where it's at.
Yeah.
It's just up. Yeah. It's just up past Crater Lake right there.
Yep. Absolutely.
There's a lot of stuff that happens around Crater Lake, man. I've heard some crazy stories over there.
Oh, like encounters and stuff.
Oh yeah. That whole area up in there. You're not that far from it when you go there.
I'll need to keep that in mind. I really need to get a little bit east, but we'll see what happens this year. But Rob, it's been a pleasure chatting with you. Thank you so much for coming on the show, and I appreciate you listening as well.
Well, it was a pleasure that being on your show and talking to you, and thank you for interviewing me and giving me the chance to share. Appreciate
Absolutely. It. You got it. And who knows, maybe our paths will cross someday. That would be cool. But you have a great rest of your day, man.
Hey, you do the same. Thanks, Jeremiah.
Thank you.
Bye.
Just want to take a few minutes to say thank you to you, all my listeners, for listening to the podcast. Please take a minute to help out the show by subscribing on YouTube, making sure you hit the bell so you don't miss any notifications, and share the episode on YouTube with a friend. Also, if you're listening to us on a podcast, thank you so much. Make sure that you're subscribed, share the show with a friend. Really, it's all about sharing the show wherever you can. If you've had a Bigfoot encounter related to the following or know someone who has, please reach out to me at bigfootsociety@gmail.com or pass on my email. Here's a list: the Subtle Lake area of Oregon, Rainbow, Oregon, McKinsey Bridge area, Sweet Home, pretty much that entire area, the north part, if you get what I mean. I'll see you back next time, listeners. Sasquatch Summerfest this year, July 11th through the 12th. It's going to be fantastic. July 11th through 12th in Green Waters Park in Oak Ridge, Oregon. And listeners, if you're going to go, you can get a 2-day ticket for the cost of one. If you use the code BFS, like Bigfoot Society, but BFS, and it'll get you some off your cost. Priscilla was nice enough to provide that for my listeners. So there you go. I look forward to seeing you there. So make sure you head over to www.sasquatchsummerfest.com and pick up your tickets today.